Yeah, I basically always have to record you guys because the morning people, their microphones don't work very well and you can't understand them. So here we are. All right, so we're gonna finish off our women, we're gonna finish off the progressive era with women's suffrage, which I think should be big number W, I think. Is that where we are? All right, there we go. Totally planned it, big number W. All right, so big number W, women's suffrage. First, let's define this word, suffrage. Suffrage means voting. Okay, suffrage means voting. So you could have something like black suffrage or Mexican suffrage or, whatever, right? When we talk about suffrage in this time period, we're talking about women. All right. So let's in your notes make two diagonal lines going down into columns, right? So you're going to have a column on the left, a column on the right. Cut your page in half. On the left side of the page, call it old, and on the right side, call it young. Okay. So we have the women's rights groups act differently, right? So they're not a unified group. Okay. All right. Do you know the names of the women who were in charge of the women's rights group for a long time?
Carrie Chapman Catt.
Carrie Chapman Catt is the latest of the groups, right? But it's before that, you got Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony, you got Elizabeth Cady Stanton, right? Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and then a bunch of other ones. Read Frances Perkins, she was one we had the other day. Carrie Chapman Catt is the leader of it now. All right, so Anthony and Stanton are both dead. Okay, they're both dead at this point. They started the movement way back in 1847, right? So they were on this movement for like 60 years. They're finally dead. Okay, Carrie Chapman Catt, she tutored under them, so she's in charge of the movement now. Okay, so I want you to put in your notes, list those names on the old side. On the left side, Anthony, Stanton, and Catt. On the old side, but put Anthony and Stanton are both dead. They were leaders of the movement for 50 and 60 years, and that Catt is alive and she's the leader of the movement. Okay. Now, underneath them, keep going down on the same column. Underneath them, what we need to do is establish like their strategy of what they do. Okay. So their strategy is mostly trying to write new laws and organize groups of women around the country. So write new laws, organize different groups of women around the country, and then go state by state. Those are their three big strategies that they're doing. Writing new laws, organizing women's groups around the country, and then going state by state. Okay, so Fernanda, do you remember what were the first states to let women vote?
It was mostly the West.
I can't hear you. Yeah.
Okay, it was mostly the West.
It was. Where in the West?
Like, I think in California.
Oh, Sam, where was it?
It was Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado.
Yeah. It was Utah's the first state that has women actually vote. Wyoming is the first state that lets women vote, but Utah actually votes first. So, yeah, it starts in Wyoming and Utah, and then spreads to Colorado, and then Idaho, Nevada. It starts spreading around the West, right? So, at this point, by the time we get to 1917, about 20 states have women are voting in about 20 states. Okay, so that's what you would put on your thing. By this point, about 20 states from the West to the East are voting. Okay, this is like a promotional picture. This was a poster that was made at the time, right? That as women are voting, we have all the other women, reaching up for it. All right, so what are some advantages of this strategy and what are some disadvantages of the strategy? We got to put both of them in the same column going down the left side. What's the advantages of this policy, of this plan of action? What do you think? Sam, what do you think are some advantages of this? What would you expect?
They can target individual states that are like either close to allowing women to vote. So like they can be that final push.
Right, that's good. So they can help push states over. That's one advantage. They can help push states over the line, right? What else? What else, Fernanda?
What is the question again?
What's the advantage with the old women's groups, the way that these old women's groups kind of organize themselves?
The advantage?
Mm-hmm.
If they can organize themselves and go state by state, they can get more women on their side and hopefully be heard, right?
Okay. All right. So the biggest advantage is that it's working, right? It is working. They started with one state and now they're up to about 20, right? So it is working and going state by state. Each state is a little bit different. So they show up in the state, they find women who are local, local women living in, say, Denver, right? You get those women in Denver organized, and then the women in Denver go to Colorado Springs, they go to Boulder, and they go to, you know what I mean? It is working, okay? The other thing is that it's durable. The change is durable. The change, you can't overthrow the change very easily, right? If you have it passed through 20 different states, you can't really change that. It's very, very difficult to unchange it. What's the disadvantage with doing it this way?
It's going to be very slow because they have to go state by state.
It is slow. So in the disadvantage, put slow. S dot 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 L dot 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 O dot 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 W dot dot dot, right? We're 70 years into this process, 70 years, and they haven't even got half the states yet. Right? And they haven't even gotten the states with all the people in them yet. They haven't gotten New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, right? All the really big populated states, they haven't gotten them yet. Slow. This is where we're going to enter in the young group. Okay? So on the right side now, we're going to call this side the young group. I want to introduce you to Emmeline Pankhurst. Emmeline Pankhurst. Right here. Okay, Emmeline Pankhurst is from England. Okay, so she's not an American, but she does come to America. She does give these speeches and stuff in America. In class, we read her speech. I had groups break up and read her speech. It doesn't really work as well with you guys, but I do want to read a little bit of it. Okay, so Sam, can I get you to start off and read this first paragraph, and then Fernanda, I'll have you pick up and do the second paragraph. Go.
I do not come here as an advocate because whatever position the suffrage movement may occupy in the United States of America. In England, it has passed beyond the realm of advocacy and it has entered into the sphere of practical policies. It has become the subject of revolution and civil war. And so tonight I am here to advocate. I am not here to advocate for women's suffrage. American suffragists can do that very well for themselves.
Good. Fernanda, go.
I'm here as a soldier who has temporarily left the field of battle in order to explain. It seems strange it should have to be explained what civil war is like when civil war is waged by women. I'm not only here as a soldier temporarily absent from the field of battle. I'm here, and that, I think, is the strangest part of my coming. I'm here as a person who, according to the law courts of my country, it has been decided is of no value to the community at all. And I am adjudged because of my life to be a dangerous person under sentence of penal servitude in a convict prison.
Okay, this paragraph right here, what can you guys both tell me about what kind of a person is she? What can you get about Emmeline Pankhurst's personality just from this?
She doesn't. You go first, Fernanda.
Okay. That she's willing to put her life on the line, even to go to prison just for women's suffrage.
Okay. All right. I think that's true. That's true. What else, Sam?
I was gonna say that she doesn't like care what kind of like thing is going wrong, like whether it's like with Black people or women, like she wants right for all.
Okay. What do you think about the fact that she talks about like war and soldiers and battle, right? She's choosing to use a lot of like battle metaphors. What does that make you think about her?
She sees this as a very neat, very big problem that must be resolved, and that
Right.
she sees it as a war.
Okay, so let's picture for a moment that you have two teachers, right? You have two teachers, and one of the teachers, you come into my room and I'm like, all right, we're going to read this speech, because it's important that you learn how to read difficult things, and then you come into the next teacher and the teacher's like, I am at a war with illiteracy. We are on the battlefield and you're going to read this speech and we're going to shoot illiteracy in the face and we're going to conquer illiteracy by reading this speech. Like, what do you think of that second teacher? What would you think about somebody who talks to you like that? Fernando, what would you think about somebody who talks like that?
I don't know. Maybe she's crazy.
A little bit, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're in my room and I'm like, we're at a war with illiteracy, I'm going to read this and declare war on this, right? Like you'd be like, this dude is freaking nuts, right?
They're like maybe making it over dramatizing it, making it more of a problem than it really is.
Yeah, maybe, right? Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe I'm just kind of a little nuts, right? I think that it's important that we think about this, right? She's a little bit kind of crazy in some ways, right? She's a dangerous person. When someone gets described as a dangerous person, I always have to ask myself, who finds her dangerous and what did she do? Right? And we're going to find this out in just a moment. Now, the most important part of her speech comes here. Okay. Let's read this part right here. Fernando, why don't you read this part for us?
Okay. We are called militant and we were quite willing to accept the name. We were detained to press this question of the enfranchisement of women to the point where we were no longer to be ignored by the politicians. The next one too?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. You have two babies very young and waiting to be fed. One baby is a patient baby
Very hungry.
and wait.
You have two babies.
Hungry and waiting to be fed. One baby is a patient baby and waits indefinitely until its mother is ready to feed. The other baby is an impatient baby and cries lustily, screams and kicks and makes everybody unpleasant until it is fed. Well, we know perfectly well which baby is attended to first. That is the whole history of politics. You have to make more noise than anybody else. You have to make yourself more obtrusive than anybody else. You have to fill all the papers more than anybody else. In fact, you have to be there all the time and see what they do not know you're under. You under.
Yeah. Sam, what's her baby metaphor? Why is this lady talking about babies? What does this mean?
She says that the more urgent problem or the thing that's needed more, in this case, like a baby who's more annoying, is going to be fed first, and the problem that's like not making a very big deal about it. Right. And so she's comparing that to women's suffrage. And so she's putting suffrage along with like the annoying baby side, which like this is a problem that has to be dealt compared to like other problems during the time.
Yeah. She's criticizing the old women, right? And the method of the old women. She says, if you guys are just sitting around being polite and just politely going from state to state and asking for rights, no one's going to give them to you. You have to be the crying baby. You got to make it unpleasant for them. You got to make it uncomfortable for them. Okay. All right. So in your notes, under the young part, you have Emmeline Pankhurst, right? You put her in there already. Underneath there, put in quotes the second baby, right? Or the two babies. That she wants the women's suffrage movement to be that second baby, be the crying baby. Okay, I'm not calling women babies. It's the metaphor, and it's her metaphor, right? But you have to be the baby that is going to get fed, right? One of those babies is getting fed right away, and the other baby is just going to sit there and be hungry, right? The women are hungry for equality. Feed them, okay? Pankhurst is actually kind of an extreme person. She actually blows buildings up. She's a terrorist in England. She like blows buildings up in the name of women's rights, right? And this is her being arrested after threatening to blow up one of these buildings. She actually does this in England a lot, where she will like set a bomb. Nobody listened to her for years, and so she upped it up a notch. She had to become the crying baby, and so she would set a bomb in a building, and then she would call the newspapers, and she'd say, "All right, come out to Wilson Street. Come out to Wilson Street at 3 o'clock. I'm going to blow this building up." And the newspapers would come out. And then right before, about 10 minutes before, she'd call up the cops and she'd say, "Hey, I'm going to blow this building up in 10 minutes. You guys should probably come and try to stop me." Right? And then the cops didn't believe her at first. And so she blew the building up. Right? She would blow the building up. And then the cops believed her. They would show up. And then immediately she would start fighting with the cops. She would start struggling and stuff. So the cops would have to throw her to the ground, and they would have to pin her down, and they'd have to handcuff her, and they'd have to manhandle her, because she knows who's watching. Who's watching? Who did she call first?
The news.
The news is there. And the newspapers are taking pictures of it. She knows that the next day, the newspaper is going to say, "Noted women's rights activist is being beaten by the cops." Right? She has this strategy. She does blow up a couple of buildings. She threatens to blow up a lot more. And she does a lot of these kinds of like stunts to get her thing. She's actually in the US at this time period. She's hiding from the Brits. She's wanted from the Brits. She got smuggled out of the country. And so she's hiding in the US. The next two women, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, are the Americans. Okay? Paul and Burns both get inspired by Pankhurst. Right? They're attending these speeches. They're getting inspired by Pankhurst, and they decide that they are going to be the second baby, right? They're going to be the crying baby. So they decide they're not going to blow up buildings, but what they do is they organize protests. And Paul and Burns don't like the older group, the older women. They're like, "You guys are too polite." So they organize protests. These women start going to the streets. We start getting parades in all the cities. We start getting women, dressing with the sash, like a purple sash. Women are wearing white in most of the parades and stuff. Women are wearing white dresses with the purple sash. That becomes the colors of women's suffrage, right? White is the color of women's suffrage. This is why you'll see this women politicians today do this. When President Trump was elected, a lot of the women were protesting because they were upset that President Trump is, like a rapist, and he does so many bad things against women, that when all the women showed up at his State of the Union address, they were all wearing white, right? And it was a protest saying, we're here for women's rights. Okay. In this picture, it's the middle of the winter, so they're all wearing winter coats, but you don't wear white in the wintertime. The protests are handling in front of the White House. Okay, what they start is a group called the Silent Sentinels. So I'll put this in our young category underneath here. So the strategy of the young is to protest, is to do parades, and to be the Silent Sentinels. Those are the strategies of the young. The Silent Sentinels is the group of women who stay in front of the White House 24 hours a day protesting, day and night. Now they go home, right? They're here for like 6 hours, and then another shift comes in, right? So there's always women who are out there 24 hours a day. And they're out there in front of the President Woodrow Wilson, and they're protesting in front of him the entire time. This drives him crazy. Woodrow Wilson is our president. Let me introduce him to you. Woodrow Wilson's the president. And he's a very, very conservative man, very conservative. He's also pretty racist and pretty sexist. He invites the KKK into the White House with him for movies. They watch movies in the White House with the KKK. He also is against women's suffrage. He believes that women should not be not vote. Women should not vote. He believes that God gave women the gift of birth and men the gift of intelligence and government. Right? That's what he believes. So he doesn't think that women should be right to vote at all. He hates this protest. The protesters are in front of the White House 24 hours a day. Now, what really, really big event has broken out at the same time period? We're going to talk about it next week, but it's happening at the same time. What really, really big world event? World War I. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is happening during World War I. And traditionally, protests stop during the war. You don't protest the country during a war, but the silent sentinels don't stop. That's an important thing you need to put in here. Okay, the silent sentinels don't stop protesting during the war. They continue to protest during the war. This drives Wilson nuts. And he talks about it. He says, I can't stand this. This is a nightmare. I close my eyes at night and the women are there chanting, how much long must we wait? How long must we wait? How long must we wait? Right? And he says, it's a nightmare. They won't stop. Alice Paul would say, of course, Mr. President, we'll stop your nightmares as soon as you stop ours. Give us the vote. Give us the vote and we'll stop. Right? But Wilson won't do it. The next line down. Wilson arrests the women. He calls up the police and has them all arrested and thrown in jail. Now, this is where it gets really dark. Wilson arrests the women and then he tells the prison to break their spirits. Break their spirits so they don't come back out. So by today's standards, the women are tortured in the prison. The women get beaten in the prison. The women get, forced to stand up for, in a 24 hours standing up where they can't go to sleep. They can't lay down. The women are tortured in the prison. So the women go on a hunger strike. In the prison, they're being tortured. The next line down, the women go on a hunger strike while they're in the prison. While they're in the prison, they're in the hunger strike, and it gets out in the news, right? It gets in the news that these women are on a hunger strike. Alice Paul's on starving. Lucy Burns is starving, right? Burns and Paul both get arrested with 14 other women, right? So it's not just those two. It's a bunch. It's 14 women. And they're all on a hunger strike. And so what the cops do is they strap the women down in seats and they put a tube up their nose, down their throat, and then they fill the tube up with chicken broth. So they're force feeding the women through tubes. So force feeding the women. That's where you need to have that. They're on a hunger strike. So Wilson orders them to be force fed.
Up their nose?
Yeah, because you can't put the tube in their mouth. What will they do?
Oh, they'll reject it.
Well, they'll just bite the tube, right? They'll just bite the tube off. So you have to put it through their nose. You hold their mouth shut and stick the tube in their nose, down their throat, right? And then you feed them that way. It's extremely painful. It's very, very painful if you can, think about it. Think about having a tube stuck up through your nose, right? It's quite painful. So what happens is the pictures get out. The pictures get out. The story gets out. There's guards who disagree with Wilson, like people who work in the prisons, like nurses and stuff, and they disagree with Wilson. The leader of the prison, he actually resigns because of it. He says, I refuse to work at a place like this. He says, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this, right? It starts to get out and it goes to all the cities across the country where all the cities are like, what the hell? The president of the United States is torturing women who just want rights. right? Let it sink in for a moment, right? The land of the free, the home of the brave, and we're torturing women who all they want is a vote, right? This causes huge problems. Protests start breaking out around the entire country. The whole country is upset about this, right? What's Carrie Chapman Catt going to do? She's the leader of the organizations on the outside of the prison. What do you expect her to do? What's her strategy? What does she do? Look in the old. What's her old strategies?
Go state by state.
She goes to the state and she says, are you upset at what they're doing to Alice Paul? Well, I have a law for you right here. We already wrote it up. You can pass this law. Right? Chapman Catt, she has groups of women working in all 50 states. She has these groups already. The groups of women just show up at the states and they say, are you upset? Are you mad that this is happening? Fix it. They have the law written out. They give the law to them and they say, fix the law. Okay. Woodrow Wilson is so, this becomes such a huge problem for him. Such a huge problem for him that he lets the women out. He lets the women out. And what do you think Alice Paul and Lucy Burns are going to do as soon as they get released?
Protest.
They go right back and they protest again. And they say, you can throw us in jail again, Mr. President, but we're not going away until you give it to us. Wilson does not give them the vote. Wilson says, we'll deal with this after the war. And then he just ignores them. He says, we'll deal with it after the war. He never actually supports the women's suffrage movement. Okay. The last line here is, after the war is over, the 19th Amendment gets passed. So it's passed in 1920. It's at the end of Wilson's presidency. 1920, the 19th Amendment is finally passed. Tennessee is the last state to ratify it. Okay, but it goes around, all the Western states sign on instantly, right? And then you start getting Eastern states to sign on. Tennessee is the last one, and it goes. But the 19th Amendment grants women the vote, and it also explicitly grants that women have all of the same rights of all citizens, that men and women are to be equal in the eyes of the US government. Good job, nicely done. All right, so this is our last big thing that we're going to talk about in the progressive era, all right? Next week, I'm going to do World War I. So we'll go back in time a little bit and do World War I, but we're going to do World War I as its own unit, right? So the progressive era is one unit, World War I gets its own unit, right? So we'll do, this is the end of this unit. I'll post a test up for you guys. You can take the test and get your points, or you can just skip the test if you want, it's up to you. It's an easy way to get points. You know, it's an easy way to get points. So we'll do that. Do you guys have any questions about this at all? I'm going to stop the recording now.